forward to our final speaker of the day, who is KRISTYN REID, who is a graduate student in the Master of Applied Sciences program at Dalhousie University. She works closely with our research engineer, John Blake, and today she'll be talking to us about how this switch has actually impacted inventory.
All right, so today I'm going to talk about modeling the impacts of extended shelf life platelets. And like Everett mentioned, a lot of this research was completed by my supervisor, John Blake. So why are platelets so hard to manage? Well, they need to be stored at 20 to 24 degrees and agitated. They're also subject to bacterial contamination. The shelf life is limited, so shelf life of 5 days, which is extended to 7 days with extra bacterial detection. And they're also perishable, so they're uniquely difficult to manage. So you can see from the graph there that there's an obvious trade-off between outdates and shortages. So if you're looking at the timelines, the current setup, there was a usable shelf life of 3 to 5 days, and with the new setup, there's a usable shelf life of 4 to 6 days. So you're extending it by 2 days, but there's additional testing, so you're really only getting 1 additional day. So the problem we were looking at is that the driver for extended shelf lives is platelet quality. There are economies if platelets aren't wasted, so basically we'll save money if we're not throwing out platelets, and the provincial government is highly cost conscious. So what we wanted to do was build a model for platelet production and distribution in Canada, validate that against historical data, change the shelf life of platelets, estimate what changes this will cause in wastage, and then identify when cost neutrality can be obtained. So just some quick economics for extended shelf life platelets. So the capital cost is around 1.3 million, and the test cost is $6 a test. The pooled platelet costs are $65, and the annual volume is around 120,000, and we're looking at a minimal acceptable rate of return of 2%. So if you look at the graph there, it's just graphing payback versus the reductions. So we need to have around 40 to 50% reduction in outdates to meet our break even. So this is just a quick Pareto chart of demand and waste. So the blue line there is demand, and it's just showing that the demand follows an 80-20 rule. So you can see that 80% of demand is taken up by 20% of the hospitals. And then we also wanted to point out that waste doesn't perfectly follow this curve, and that just tells us that it's the medium-sized regional hospitals that are a little bit further away from CBS sites that cause a lot of the outdates. So one of the reasons that these regional sites have a lot of wastage is because they're quite a distance away from the CBS sites. So you can see if you look at the Maritimes where we are, getting the platelets from Dartmouth to some of the northern New Brunswick places is quite a distance. It's about the same as London to Aberdeen. So by the time the platelets arrive, they already have less shelf life available. So when we built the simulation, we wanted to validate to make sure that it was correctly modeling the CBS system. So we verified it against collections, imports, and exports, and then we validated it against outdates at CBS and aggregated outdates at hospitals. So you can see there from the chart that the model predicted very well what the actual data was. So that told us that we could use our model to see what the changes would cause to the system. So some of the experiments that we ran were changing the shelf life between 6, 7, and 8 days, assuming a minimum 2-day end labeling delay. We also used hospital order triggers of 1.1 and 2.1 days demand and hospital order up-tos of 1.1 and 2.1. So that's just basically when orders are placed and how much the order is for. We set the CBS inventory target to 1, 2, and 3 days. And then the duration that we ran the simulation for was 10 replications of 52 weeks, and each of these replications had a 14-day warm-up, and it was a method of batched means. So when you look at the results that the simulation actually came out with, you can see that the shortage didn't actually change much between the 5 and 8 days, but the wastage had a decreasing trend. So wastage is reduced by about 16% for each day of shelf life that it's extended. So if you look at this graph, the 40% is what we're trying to get to reach the break even. So if you only extend the shelf life, you'll get that 36%. But it's not quite where we need to be. So there are some other things that we looked at to help reduce the wastage even more. So first is adjusting the collections. So with the extended shelf life, the Tuesday gap becomes less of an issue. We didn't really look into the optimal schedule for collections, but this is one that we tried, and we could see that that reduced the wastage by an additional 2%. So we're getting a little closer to that 40%, but not quite there yet. So then we looked at the mix of collections. So there's a noticeable mismatch between units collected and units requested. So about half of all CBS platelets waste are due to O positive. You can see from the graph that most of them are pretty good for wastage, but O positive and B positive aren't great. And that's because the demand is 95% of collections except for those O positives and B positives. So if we were able to better mix what we were collecting with what is being requested, that could get us an additional 7%, which pushes us over that threshold to meet the required payback. So some takeaways from this is that extending the shelf life of platelets reduces wastage by 16% per usable day. So the 7-day shelf life will result in 32% reduction in waste if nothing else changes. There are also additional benefits that could be met if we change some other things. So modifying the collection schedule. We don't have the optimal one yet, but the one that was tried saved about 2%. Changing the platelet collection profile to more closely match demand, that would get us another 7%, which will get us to where we need to be. And the simulation suggests holding 3 days supply in the system. So extended shelf life platelets are cost neutral, but some of these operational changes in the supply chain are likely necessary to get it to work out right. And that's all for me.